Hello and welcome to the Mount Rushmore podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friends Richard.
Hello.
And Michael.
Howdy.
These guys are always fighting tooth and nail about the Mount Rushmore of any given topic, the four things that best embody a certain topic, and this week is no different. But this week is about differences and about identity and about phases and changes in the life of a performer, David Bowie, particularly his performance identities. And so that's the topic, David Bowie, identities and phases.
You know, I want to say something. You know, we're recording this in February 2017.
Yeah.
And I want to be the first person in the world to ever say this about David Bowie. I think he's a chameleon, you guys. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
No.
So mark
That's
it down
pretty
on the
crazy.
calendar. David Bowie, Bing, chameleon.
Not a karma chameleon, though, right?
No,
That's
no.
Boy George.
I'm thinking of the wrong guy. Okay,
Yeah,
so
there we
are
go.
we talking about Boy George now? Or which one is this?
I found I've been reading this Bowie biography, and it's been...
Is it called Bowiography?
The Bowiography. It was not a David Bowie, it's Jim Bowie. And it's been not at all helpful for this podcast.
Yeah. I made that joke earlier.
Did I preempt it?
No. No. I made that joke earlier before off air. So
One thing I find is interesting is, like, you know, Bowie changed his identity as a performer and in life a lot. There was the onstage Bowie and the offstage Bowie, and you seemed like a seeker, a person who was fascinated with what identity was, both as an individual whose offstage identity was very much about performance, and fascinated also with there was one list of Bowie phases that described him as having a vampire phase due to the film The Hunger. And I feel like Bowie spent a lot of his life as kind of a vampire, copying different performers and subsuming their identity in order to have something new and relevant and interesting to present out to the world. So it seems like he was somebody who was addicted to a lot of substances, but he was also addicted to being artistic and relevant and a piece of art in which the canvas never dried and was always evolving. But this biography basically said Bowie's life was art and Bowie's music was this secondary thing. Like he made music basically to accomplish what he wanted to as a performer, whereas somebody else you can't imagine, somebody like maybe John Lennon, being separate from the music. But for Bowie, pop was a means to the end of being this public persona.
well, pop was pop in the sense of Andy Warhol almost. This sort of disposable plastic sort of thing that you can sort of transmute and just sort of a shell you can take off and on.
Yeah, I had kind of written Bowie off in terms of, obviously he's a true artist, but you've met those people, like you think of like a Madonna, where her...
Never met her.
Never met her. Okay, well, when Madge and I are hanging out,
Okay.
who are continually observing youth culture, who are continually observing global culture to try to find their next new thing, to try to extend their shelf life beyond that of a traditional pop star.
Right. Madonna's a great appropriator is what she is.
Yeah. I think you have to, like somebody like a Lady Gaga seems like she has her identity is really ripped off of what Bowie's was. Because
Sure.
Bowie's first identity was essentially a way to cover up the fact that he was, he looked weird. He was a person with an alternative sexuality at a time when that wasn't allowable or even speakable.
Right.
So he started crafting this. I imagine he was somebody whose day-to-day job was to put on a role that allowed him to intermingle with all the kids at school and all these other people.
And his first few albums kind of released just as
Davy Jones,
David Bowie, sort of mop top looking, folk rock singer, bombed.
Yeah.
So it kind of becomes, okay, they don't like me. What can I do to make myself successful?
What can I do? Yeah. So that's usually at the beginning of this podcast we say who chose the topic and why they think it's fascinating, and that's I chose it, and that's why I think it's fascinating. That somebody took the opportunity to use the platform of musician and popular music to create not just one artistic statement, but to create many and to abandon them at the peak of their interest level among audiences. So Michael Jackson kind of did the same thing with variations throughout his career, and Prince, incredible genius, he changed his name into a symbol at some point, but for the most part, he did the same thing. Bowie said a lot of it is about realization that you can be anybody you want to be. We put people in boxes. You don't have to be in a box. You can reinvent yourself. That's very liberating. You don't have to be one thing or one persona or one character your entire life. You can do whatever you want. So I find that compelling about Bowie as an artist, and one reason why his death was had a big impact on a lot of people who felt themselves to be standing outside of the mainstream. He was the patron saint of weird for a lot of people who
absolutely
felt like they weren't born in the mainstream and couldn't even get there if they tried. So,
hey, Richard, was this like all a preamble of a humble brag by Jeff that basically revealed that he read a book about Bowie? You son of a bitch.
He does read a lot of books.
We get it.
Suspicious.
You can read.
That's all I'm going to say.
It's harder for
suspicious.
us.
I haven't finished the book. You know, the book also...
That's my favorite part.
Never mind.
I haven't finished the book.
No. The book also...
Read the jacket cover. Yeah, that's it.
Such a cool jacket. It was a white jacket, and then
It was the Union Jack one that he had from outside.
The book does posit how much of an asshole Bowie was, too. So
does it?
Bowie used so many people. Bowie, this guy like Iggy Pop who develops this... identity, and Bowie comes out and says, "I'm going to be Ziggy Stardust," and rips off his identity. So, but a lot of Bowie's outward message to people was this liberating, artistic, exotic, androgynous, otherworldly identity that encouraged other people to do a little bit of the same thing. But at the same time, this isn't about really him as an individual, but a lot of artists have to kind of abandon their regular duties as a father, as a husband, as an artistic collaborator,
As a human being.
This book says, like other people, like say Picasso, or he let people by the wayside.
Pablo Picasso was never called an asshole.
He was never, not in New York. So, all right. So, raise your hand. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Living for the record, nobody raised their hand. Michael's going to go for it.
Well, I think the first one and the most obvious is probably Ziggy
Aladdin
Stardust.
Sane.
Yeah.
What?
No, just kidding.
shit.
Ziggy
Okay.
Stardust, yeah.
You touched on it earlier, and I think it's
You saw that?
a theme. I think it's a theme. That's so stupid. I think that's a theme that runs through all of my picks and just in general is the otherworldliness of... You mentioned him with a different sexuality at the time, and everything about his characters tend to be this alien persona, something that comes from another world, or something that, not every persona, but they all kind of are started with like an outsider point of view. And I think that, the story behind Ziggy Stardust and the Spider from Mars and the whole fake band that came out of that, the band within a band thing, I think is pretty interesting, and I think that's the most visually iconic look, the thing that people can look back to initially and be like, okay, that is 100% David Bowie, and that is 100% him adopting a new character, and it wasn't just David Bowie. He took on a whole new name and played, under the guise of a different band while on stage. While you went to go see David Bowie, you also went to go see Ziggy Stardust.
And I was doing some research. I didn't know, actually, something I did not know.
I read a freaking book.
I read a Wikipedia page, Buster, all right? Maybe even two of them. One thing I didn't know, I read a Rolling Stone article that apparently at least part of the Ziggy Stardust persona came from this 50s singer who originally wrote Brand New Cadillac, later got covered by The Clash, who eventually, because of drugs and other things, dropped out of the music scene and believed that he was an alien god sent down to Earth and started a cult based on that. And that was part of the development of the Ziggy Stardust persona.
Oh, cool.
That whole idea of him being this alien who was sent down to Earth to tell this story that humans had 5 years left to live, but he was going to be the person who kind of delivered this sort of like Christ-like salvation. So it was kind of... That was at least part of the development. I know you mentioned sort of the Iggy Pop sort of...
Yeah. Pirating the glam rock, androgyny rock thing.
Yeah. So I think that's where that's maybe where the look came from. Certainly the backstory came from these other places, and Bowie's always had a fascination with space and aliens and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this amalgam of, again, it's kind of that idea of not necessarily creating something new, but it's looking back on whether it's pop rock history or, earlier ideas of space exploration, and kind of taking that and then taking something that's slightly personal about himself and putting that into the rest of it. And I think one of the themes I have a lot of mine is this kind of idea of his personas, and I mentioned this earlier, being plastic, being things that are just very disposable, that he's, in a lot of ways, a lot of these, he's doing almost an impression of a rock star doing a persona. It's almost like he's trying to create what's the perfect example of this cliche of a certain type of rock star.
Yeah.
And, Ziggy Stardust is the perfect cliche of the hedonistic, pansexual
glam rock,
which certainly he was all those things, but it's also kind of a way to, it's almost trying to have it both ways. It's almost cheating that it's like, he can be that person, but he can also say, well, it's just sort of part of it's trolling is what I'm trying to say. It really is like in almost that line of like, well, it's just a part I'm playing, but it's also him playing it. And it's also based on things that are really happening in his life.
I thought it was interesting. Two things. One, with The Man Who Fell to Earth, that he took on this role in a movie.
Right.
Of almost the exact, he wasn't a rock and roll star, but he was a creature from outer space that came to Earth and was isolated and, taken from his family and, taken apart by the government basically and addicted. Right. And then that he just took another medium to tell a very similar story. Along with that, Marilyn Manson did a very similar thing with an album called Mechanical Animals.
Right.
Where he basically had the same thing. It was about like this alien that came down to Earth, but then gets abducted by the government, gets him addicted to drugs, and puts him in a rock and roll band called the Mechanical Animals. I mean, a lot of his albums are like concept albums, but you can definitely tell that they're, I wouldn't say ripped off. I'm sure that there's a great affection and
I'd say ripped off.
Well,
you don't have to. I'll say it.
I would say that there is a affinity there towards another musician that he respected and took that idea and made it maybe 100 times more cynical and darker. And
sure,
I think what you said, like, or maybe it's Jeff, is like, it's interesting to see him just kill it, to kill a character when he's like done with it and been like, I don't think that's what people would generally do now, or at least I don't think the record labels would want you to do that. I think they'd want you to continue like, okay, that was a hit, let's keep going with that thing.
As a joke, I mentioned Aladdin Sane, when we did our first intro here. And that's fascinating to me because you mentioned Ziggy Stardust being the classic look, right? Mm-hmm. But I think if you were asked somebody to have one image
the t-shirt,
the thing that everyone was wearing, weeks, months after David Bowie died, it was the Aladdin Sane cover.
Sure, but I mean that was part of his Ziggy Stardust persona. I mean, it was an album that came out after.
Well, it was an extension of it. I think he said that it was like Ziggy Stardust goes to the U.S., goes to America, basically.
Sure, but it's all. I mean, it's not. We're not necessarily talking about individual albums. We're talking about.
Well, we're not. But it was
a look or an era of.
Well, but it was after the Ziggy Stardust persona had been killed off. Timeline wise,
I think we can both agree.
I think we're
splitting hairs.
Well, I guess my point with that one is. Yeah, I think he did have a finite shelf life to it. That actual album, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, is basically a self-contained story. Right? It's the rise and the fall. I mean, the fall happens at the end, and it's a hell of a lot better plotted out kind of concept album than the Who's Tommy. Well, it makes a lot more sense, kind of just as its own thing.
Yeah,
but I think that was one persona he had a hard time getting away from.
Sure. Okay.
Harder than most. I mean, then he had the Aladdin Sane. After that, you had and I don't know if I'm stepping on your list, let me know. But it was the Halloween Jack.
No, he's not on my list, mostly because that's ridiculous.
Because it's basically Ziggy Stardust with an eye patch. So, but it was this long stretch of just like kind of, even though he killed off Ziggy,
variants of a theme.
it was still, I think, pretty Ziggy
Yeah.
related. And thank God we're not talking about Ziggy, the cartoon character.
Can't catch
terrible.
a break.
Doesn't wear pants.
One thing I think we can agree on is Bowie rocked a mullet better than a lot of entertainers we've ever seen.
Oh,
And
sure.
Made it amazing in those first three identities. Okay, Michael and Richard both chose Ziggy Stardust. So, Richard, it's now your second choice.
And my second choice is the Thin White Duke.
Oh.
The character loosely, or I think maybe not even that loosely, based on the previously mentioned Man Who Fell to Earth. Mm-hmm. You know, when you mentioned that, I sort of thought, yeah, there is some Ziggy there, but it really is certainly visually
Oh, sure.
the
sure.
proto,
Yeah, I got that.
the proto look to the Thin White Duke.
He was thin.
He was white. I don't know if he was a duke,
Might have been an
questionable.
earl.
archduke
Oh,
or something.
Viscount. Did he have a duchy? Did he pass it?
He had more than a duchy, I think, in this period, because this was square in the middle of, to quote him, his astronomical cocaine use. So that certainly played a role in, I think, what the character became, because he sort of became manifestation of cocaine use.
Yeah.
Very kind of distant and cold and
He looked-
sort of a million miles away and sort of just seemingly not moored to this
Yeah.
any human interaction whatsoever. But at the same time, also very much, certainly when compared to Ziggy Stardust, looking more like a classic entertainer.
What was the what albums did you record under that kind of
Well,
identity?
a little bit Young Americans, but
Okay.
primarily station to station. Certainly the Young Americans tour, he was performing with the Thin White Duke persona, which I think was sort of a reflection of that album being kind of his, as he said, plastic soul album. And so what do you do if you're kind of a white British glam rocker suddenly having to go out on tour and sing these Philly soul songs with like Luther Vandross as your, backup singer and all this stuff? Well, you just sort of create this persona that is incredibly, on one hand, conventionally entertaining. He's dressed up nice. He's got like a nice shirt and vest and very polished as a performer. But at the same time, this persona that is so kind of fake and just artifice that you don't actually have to deal with any of the realities that are happening around you.
Do you think in a situation like this, the music came first and then the identity was built to protect himself from it? Or do you think, I mean, I don't know. You just said you're in the middle of a book. Do they kind of...
He didn't get to station by station to station yet.
I just wonder if they're like hand in hand, if they're like total concept, music and personality, and then boom, there you go. Or I wonder if they're just, if he's writing music, like you said, like he's singing soul music and then puts something on top of it to protect himself and then can get rid of that when, he doesn't
Whenever he
need to.
feels like it's necessary, yeah.
In the book, they do identify him as a chameleon, and him identifying an individual who he wanted to rip off their entire identity and seeing somebody in his desire to reinvent himself and his desire for ultimate celebrity, he would target people like Mick Jagger. We know he duetted with Mick Jagger, but he would see somebody and see the effect that they had on the audience or see the record sales that they had and decide, I'm going to absorb and subsume their persona and their sway over their audience. So I imagine he saw some entertainer or somebody and said, I want to be just as Cab Calloway in his white suit or some soul singer. So.
This is also the era where this character sort of has he's called it pro-Aryan, sort of very Aryan sort of character.
Yeah.
And it's kind of when he gets into the flirting with fascism, at least in terms of being a character, and has in character makes some very pro-fascist statements, and he gets into trouble with this incident where he's in London and he's riding around in a open car and starts making Nazi salutes to the crowd.
That happened a
which
lot.
Which is not good, by the way. You shouldn't. That's not rock and rollers out there. If you're planning on becoming an international star, don't do it. Don't do a Hitler salute. Bad for business.
There was a lot of elements of like punk rock that that happened with in the late 70s and early 80s too. I seem to recall like Susie Sue.
Well, she used to have a swastika armband.
Well, there you go. Like there was the idea of
sure, like the Ramones had like
fascism that came that you're, a generation that grew up just, real recent. Like the World War II was so recent, and maybe you were either born right then or just after then, and seeing all the effects of it, that there's like a piqued interest in like, oh, I can press someone's buttons and I'm 22 years old.
Right.
And
yeah, it's less about the actual kind of philosophy.
Yeah.
It's more about just pissing people off.
Michael Jackson did that stuff too. They're playing with the phenomenology and the megalomania
sure.
that pop stars and fascist leaders seem to share.
But do you think he was aware of it? Because I'm sure Bowie, at least on some level, was aware of it, even if his, again, astonishing drug use may have blinded him to what really was going on. But I think at least the character was developed with a very purposeful idea.
Yeah.
But like with someone with Michael Jackson, do you think he really understood the kind of the hagiography was like an in-joke, or do you think that was really just him?
In that Michael Jackson also appropriated other things that were, by terms of politically correctness, not appropriate, like the minstrelsy of Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson wore white gloves and white socks and things that were throwbacks to minstrel shows and things like that. So were you to examine, but ultimately those things are stagecraft as well. So I imagine Bowie kind of did it from a point of view of stagecraft, not off stage, driving down the streets of
London, Waterloo Station, doing Nazi salutes. But and the last thing about this, I find it interesting that when he decides to ditch this persona and kind of get clean and wants to get away from the fascist persona, what does he do? Hightails it to Berlin for the next three albums. It's kind of like I think you're missing the point here somewhere, Davey.
Richard's done his second. Michael, what's your second?
My second is Jareth, the Goblin King from Labyrinth.
Oh, cool. Thank God you chose this, by the way.
Is this?
Oh yeah, because Sarah was on my ass about this one pretty good. Well, if you don't choose it, at least mention that it's a at least mention it as a runner up, because
I was kind of on the fence when we were talking about like personalities. It was weird for me to think like I was very focused on David Bowie as a musician. And then I started thinking, well, he's done a lot more than just music. He's been involved. He's been a painter, and he's been an actor in a lot of different roles, whether he was, Andy Warhol or the man who fell to earth, as we've talked about,
or the Elephant Man,
or like, and then this
or Stormtrooper number 7 in Star Wars: A New Hope. You guys didn't know that?
Was he?
No, I'm an a-hole.
Jeff Hopkins.
Man, you fell for that one, Michael.
Well, listen, he read a book. He can say anything right now, and I'm going to believe him. But as a movie role, I think the Jareth one is the most iconic and the most. It's just like it's very well loved for being like this villainous outsider, kind of other side of the mirror character. And I think that also plays into all of his types of personas. Is they're all otherworldly. They're all kind of, they're all strange.
Yeah.
And like this guy in tight pants and big hair, and it was very 80s, but then very silly 80s. It was this Jim Henson version of, mythology and,
Were Johnny Depp alive, he would have played that role. And I feel like Johnny Depp's entire career has been to play that role.
A remake of Labyrinth with Johnny Depp.
Well, I think
that is like a really good casting.
That is pretty good.
He is the outsider who is the insider in this otherly world, who's escorting the Alice in Wonderland type character to what may be her good or bad fate. So I think it's fascinating that when we think of Bowie playing a role in cinema, and do those roles in cinema count as part of as we discuss this category, all of his roles were roles in cinema. All of his singing personas were cinematic roles.
Sure.
They were all stagecraft personas.
That's totally right. That we're not just talking about a musicianship. We're talking about the visuals that accompany the musicianship that add to this identity.
And what wonderful casting that was for a million reasons. So.
Yeah. And the music for the movie was kind of fun and silly. I really only remember the Dance Magic or Magic Dance song. Mm-hmm. There's a few others that I think are fine. I mean, musically, I think it's okay, but it's not like there's anything really to write home about. But maybe I'm selling myself short, and maybe I'm crapping all over my own point in terms of importance. But like the Jim Henson Studios put out 2 movies basically in the early 80s that were kind of targeted towards the same sort of audience. You know, it was Labyrinth and it was The Dark Crystal, and they never really did anything that was on the same level of those. And I wonder if they stand out more because they only did 2 of them. And I think that Bowie's performance was, you know, iconic in that way. That it's like, okay, that helped. It helped as a singular thing that there weren't multiple. Like there wasn't a Labyrinth 2 where someone else came back as the Goblin King. You know, Johnny Depp, as you said, or whoever.
Yeah, were Henson to be like Burton in that he created multiple fantastical worlds, and we saw these same characters coming back, that might not have felt so special. It seemed like there was just a couple outings. So I love that casting, and I love the fact that were we to have a curmudgeonly character today, and we cast Bill Murray in that character, it would be so gratifying because he spent his lifetime living up to that character.
Right.
And Bowie had spent his entire career convincing us that he was otherworldly and that he has physically the countenance. He's got a grin that's both happy and evil at the same time. I mean, he's Halloween Jack. He's got a jack-o'-lantern grin, and the heterochromia in his eyes make him naturally kind of otherworldly. He's got 2 different eyes and a dilated pupil, so the casting couldn't have been more perfect there. Whether he did get to really show his chops as a singer or not, it was still really cool.
Well, let me say why Sarah wanted you to wanted somebody to choose this one.
Yeah,
is his codpiece and how, and this is her quote. So this came out what, 85? 86?
Sounds about right.
86, 87, something like that.
Yeah.
So Sarah would have been like 12. According to her, this Bowie in that codpiece was a sexual awakening for her and many women, many girls, her and many girls her age.
Oh dear.
So
my, as George Takei would say.
My.
Takei.
So I can't comment to that personally.
Yeah.
But I'm just gonna leave that out.
Leave that out there.
Yeah.
My favorite thing was him throwing babies.
That's good stuff. That brings us to our halftime. And I'm going to implore you to let us know what your favorite Bowie phase was on Facebook. Go to the Mount Rushmore podcast page on Facebook. Let us know what your favorite Bowie phase was. And let us know what you'd like to see in the future with the Mount Rushmore podcast. We'd love to entertain some category suggestions. We've been doing it for 50 plus episodes, and we're not running out of steam. We're just getting started. But we'd love to get you into the dialogue.
Yeah, for example, if you'd like us to hear us do the John Cougar Mellencamp phases.
The different phases.
When he was John Cougar. Mm-hmm. John Cougar Mellencamp.
American Fool.
John Mellencamp.
Pink
Johnny
Houses.
Coog.
Johnny Coogie.
The Coog Star.
The Coog.
I introduced him at a concert once and accidentally said Cougar Mellencamp.
Oh, no.
Fucking pissed off.
Oh, no. Wait, hold on. We're not just going past this here. Hold on. This wasn't in Burbank, was it?
Was it his denim jacket phase or his slightly worn denim jacket phase?
I think he had been divorced from a supermodel. So this is post American. It's after Bruce Springsteen had reclaimed the throne of the America's favorite troubadour.
Sure.
And I think it's after violins had started to come into the music. So it's after Rain on the Scarecrow, Blood on the Plow, or whatever. All right, Cherry Bomb.
Right. So where was this concert?
It was in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. It was a buyout for a company that I was working for. They had enough money that they could buy out big stars and things like that. We weren't supposed to look at him either, so he was an asshole. So,
okay. Yeah. It's good to know.
Yeah.
So we won't be doing that one.
We won't be doing that one. So anyway, join us on our Twitter. Join us on our Instagram. We'd love to have you download, rate, and review all of the episodes, the current ones, the past ones on iTunes.
The future ones, that'd be interesting.
The future ones, yeah. Try that. Try that. So we'd appreciate that if you would do that. We are back. Each of these dudes has exclaimed, "We are back." Each of these guys has let us know what their...
I don't have a Mount Rushmore. Why are you such a fucking idiot?
No. I'll work on that one.
I can't pick just 4.
We can't just do that. You can't just drop it on us right here. We got a couple weeks to think it over and...
We're in the back nine. These guys have told us the first two choices, and now we're going to probably into deep cuts as far as Bowie personas are concerned. So, Richard, give us your third.
I think you're correct. I think we started knocking out. We knocked out kind of the big ones already.
Yeah.
Come on, Richard.
dealer's
Come on,
choice.
mime look.
That is exactly
Oh my
what I'm
God.
doing.
Is it?
Yes.
No.
Yes, of course.
Mime is a winner.
The Perot mime specifically from
Not Ross Perot, the Perot.
That would be incredible if it was though, right? From the Ashes to Ashes video, which if it was Ross Perot again, ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Oh man, I was waiting for your Ross Perot impression, and here we go.
Well, I got a million of them, all terrible. So this was 1980, I think it was, and kind of the Bowie. It was like sort of a down period for Bowie. The Berlin albums were very well critically received, but they weren't necessarily, commercially successful. Like everyone loves the song "Heroes," but it was actually kind of bombed when it came out, for example. So he starts to take this interest in sort of the new romantic movement that's coming out of England, and at the same time also is sort of looking back to some parts of his past again. A couple of things. One, specifically the Major Tom character, who in Ashes to Ashes, he sort of references, he takes another look at, but instead of being this sort of romantic sort of character of cutting his tether to go to Earth, it's really more about like the dark side of it. What actually happened to him. He becomes a junkie and, can't figure out how to live in this world. Mm-hmm. And also, in terms of a look, he studied mime back in the 60s as he was trying to also kick off his music career unsuccessfully. Yeah. He also became an unsuccessful mime.
There's like a successful mime. So that's about,
Marcel Marceau. No, that's not true. Marcel Marceau, Shields and Yarnell, Mummenschanz.
All of
is
Blue
that
Man
miming?
Group. Mummenschanz. Are we talking about like pantomime, the white-faced mime? That's what Bowie was. Pantomime, the white face.
Yeah.
And
when you picture the character, it's the white-faced clown with like the hat and everything wearing white.
Well, then
the commedia dell'arte sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that the field was open and primed and just waiting for a new mime to come in and scoop up all that good mime money.
My first training in
I totally
forgot
about this look though, or
was
this
mime.
identity.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Until we, I was joking around.
Sure.
I was like, oh,
This is a art form that's thousands of years old, and since I think it was the movie 10 or something where Dudley Moore punches a mime, suddenly mimes have been on the shit list of every early morning DJ or hacky comedian. When this art form is thousands of years old.
Sure, it's perhaps one of the earliest forms of
hacky.
Mass entertainment. But Bowie kind of, Bowie being Bowie kind of turned that sort of, like I said, commedia dell'arte kind of, and that character is supposed to be kind of a fool who winds up getting betrayed in love, but still too naive to realize what has happened.
Was all the white, grease paint, was that cocaine?
He had a bunch left over. He was sober by that point, so he needed something to do with it. But no, it was so. But it was kind of like the dark version of that. Mm-hmm. It's almost like the Pennywise the clown, dark version of a clown. So it's sort of like that character, but except instead of being naive, being
I think he's kind of Pagliacci.
worn down. Almost like a Pagliacci.
Yeah.
It's kind of bringing that into the mix, but sort of instead of being incredibly naive, it's the character that's been incredibly worn down by life, and sort of what happens when the fool realizes that he's the fool. Mm-hmm. And also, he's a fucking mime.
I wonder if this is a flip side to the ego-based personas that Bowie had, in which maybe he thinks this guy is the clown. He doesn't have as much power. He doesn't have as much prestige as the other characters.
Well, I think it's interesting that, this, as I said, that he was kind of, his star was waning a bit in the late 70s, at least in terms of popularity. And this is the thing that kind of got him back as a successful entertainer, let's say. Ashes to Ashes was a really big hit, that album was. And by the way, also tangentially, perhaps my favorite Bowie song, Funky as Hell. One of the, maybe on the Rushmore of Funky as Hell songs. But it's, I think it's a testament to Bowie that he was able to take a fucking Commedia dell'arte mime and make him cool.
Yeah. Dell'arte, like...
Means of the arts, John.
Of the arts. No, I'm saying Dell'arte does my yard. He's the guy.
Oh, yeah.
He's my groundskeeper.
Dell'arte was a really fast surf rock guitarist, right, from the 50s.
Right, I believe he was. The other thing I really know about Commedia dell'arte, by the way, is remember that awful Aaron Sorkin Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip?
Oh, yeah. The 30 Rock competitor, yeah.
Yeah, one of the characters, who's like the hot female, young female, like, performer in the show, became a hit because she created a Commedia dell'arte clown character that took off with the fans. And that was the point when that happened. That was the point where I remember specifically saying, "Oh, fuck this bullshit." That's a bridge too far, yeah. Aaron Sorkin.
Okay.
Speaking of cocaine.
Michael, what's your third?
My third, I don't think is a very popular choice or vision or version of him, but it was like his Earthling album, 1996, 1997. It's funny how a goatee and orange spiky hair and a really thin demeanor and drum and bass and European electronics really just kind of summed up the later half of the 1990s. And I think that this album and this style of music, I think it was two things. One, I think it was incredibly of the time more than we realize. Like, I think that he was probably making music and inspired by people like Chemical Brothers or Prodigy or things probably a lot earlier than most people were.
Yeah.
And I think that this album was songs like I'm Afraid of Americans and...
was that when Trent Reznor was involved with that, right?
Yeah. That I think that it came out at a time when he hadn't really had a ton of new good music for a while. Like by the end of the mid-'80s, he did like his Tin Machine stuff.
Which we'll get into.
Okay. Like, I can't think of music from, the end of China Girl to...
There's that Never Let Me Down album.
See, I don't...
Which is kind of a garbage. Which maybe his worst album.
You mentioned it earlier. He kind of has like these kind of peaks and valleys with his music where like things maybe are commercially low, but, critically hot. Like you said, his Berlin trilogy. And I think that this was an album that came out and a look behind it where he felt very in the moment. And I think that's kind of rare for him because I think that he was always ahead of it. But you look back and you see like you see the Union Jack jacket, the Alexander McQueen Union Jack getup, and you see like he looks very much like, oh yeah, you're in 1996, you're in 1997.
Right.
And I think that's very strange for him, even though a lot of artists were doing the same thing. You mentioned Madonna earlier. She had an album in like 94 called Bedtime Stories and another one in 98, Ray of Light, where they were very like
of the moment.
Yeah. And you look back and you're like, oh my, she's, I joked about her being a chameleon as well, or joked about him being a chameleon, but Madonna has been very trend worthy and very in it as much as anyone else has. And I think for David Bowie to do that, to suddenly be like, oh, he's putting music out that sounds like it came out now, I think is very strange for him, but I think very important to get him back into the mix of things.
Yeah, I think the two influences that Madonna and Bowie might have flirted with on and off is being relevant in dance music and in radio. So I think dance music as a very like a meritocracy. So clubs respond to what people are actually respond to on a dance floor, and so for Bowie for Madonna to decide, Madonna as a kind of culture pirate goes and discovers what voguing is, and immediately darts into a recording studio and writes a song called Vogue.
Right.
And then how music changed. She would find the hippest producers and get into a studio as soon as she could.
Work with Tricky or Bjork, for Bedtime Stories you mentioned, or Lenny Kravitz, I think for Ray of Light. She did some
that sounds
writing.
Right.
It's anyone more in 1998 than Lenny Kravitz.
Yeah. I think that there are bands like that. Like if you look at like U2, like there are people that have like slightly adjusted their music, like, and then some of them are kind of straight, like the YouTube, what was the pop album, and like the song Discotheque, like it was a very conscious album and a very conscious decision to kind of bring in a more synthesizer or whatever, but like.
It's like whenever you hear a band make their blank album,
sure,
it's like,
that's a good
that's
point.
whenever you kind of, more often than not, it's not successful.
There is a connection between, I think, Bowie and Duran Duran via Nile Rodgers, but hearing Simon Le Bon interviewed about Duran Duran's record output and saying they have suffered from their desire to stay relevant by doing their synth album, their punk album, their grunge album, by trying to keep in fashion with whatever's selling on the radio. By being a radio band, they've always struggled to try to be relevant to what is playing on the radio at that time. And I think Duran Duran, like Bowie and maybe like Madonna, have suffered from their longevity in that by the time I understood who Bowie was, I knew him both as an oldies act and an old guy trying to stay current on MTV. And he was still around up until last year, and still they're coming in and out of relevancy. But I think that's a challenge in that whenever an artist his identity has already been placed in the Hall of Fame, which he was in '96 or something. Once you're already in the Hall of Fame,
that's right around this time. Yeah, that's funny.
Nobody wants you to do a trendy album anymore because. Then
go do a greatest hits album, or tour or something.
Yeah, because you don't want to see Dad putting on the outfits that all the kids are wearing, So I think it's something that is their blessing is their ability to always be attuned in with what popular culture is, and it's their curse when they wear whatever the current fashion is musically.
It's like the Spinal Tap always being sort of like a half a step behind whatever the culture is of the moment, whether it's the the Beatles or the psychedelia or heavy metal. It's always like not quite right.
Richard, what's your fourth?
So my last one, and we are talking about deep dives and a little bit of trying to sort of shake things out in your middle age, is the Tin Machine.
Okay.
Tin Machine Bowie.
I glossed right past that, assuming that
it's easy to do. So
I think he tried to gloss right past that by the second album too.
Well, we'll get into that for sure, but right around 89 or 90, I mentioned Never Let Me Down, and then the Last Spider tour, which was this massive, like $50 million to stage, like monstrosity of a tour. And after he got done with that, he kind of just got sick of being a pop interest. Like he wasn't interested in being a top 40 act anymore. And he was looking at some of the indie bands that were coming out, specifically the Pixies. He was a huge Pixies fan from the early stages. There's actually a Pixies documentary where he talks a lot about the band and hearing them for the first time.
I really like these artists called the Pixies.
This Frank Black is very interesting.
This Black Frank's this fellow.
But so he decides to go ahead and create a band, but not in the kind of standpoint of the Spiders from Mars or something where it was a backing band for him. He actually wants to get into an actual democratic band situation where he's just more the singer and guitar player, one of the four guys in the band. So he creates Tin Machine with Reeves Gabriel, who had been, I think, he played guitar with him on a couple albums. And then also Soupy Sales Kids.
Oh, the Haleys or Sale.
Yeah, Soupy Sales Kids.
Yeah,
I think that's
Hunt Sales and Tony. I think.
Yeah,
I think that's both noble and idiotic.
Right.
I think, but once you've gotten to the point where you are one of the most recognizable figures in the world, I think it's impossible to be like, I just want to fade away to the back and be just a man.
Just one of the guys.
You're no longer a man in the band. You're David Bowie, and either you have to like accept that weight, or you have to. I guess that's what happened to him. You can't get like it's hard. You can't get past like you talk about being a president of the United States too. Is like you're always the president. People don't say like they might call you former president, but you're always known as the president. No one's like, hey, remember that
Ronald Reagan guy?
Yeah,
or that Obama fellow.
It's always on you. And when you're a pop star of his size, like it's noble. I would think that to be like, I just want to put this aside for to be a part of a collective, but like.
It really did kind of feel like a purging.
That would be amazing to be a pop star for 30 years and never been in a band. I've always been
right.
I've always been this guy.
So what? Yeah, just having no like concept of how a band concept works, right?
Is it am I the top bunk? Am I the?
Yeah.
Wait. Okay. Who left the toilet seat up, guys? Was it me this time?
Is it my turn?
Am I driving?
Is it my turn to drive? Yeah, I was just gonna say I don't know how to drive.
Crack a barrel again. I don't think I can stand it.
Can't we go to a Waffle House?
Your Bowie is pretty good, Jeff.
Turn back, Sarah. All right. Sorry, I'm just shitting on our podcast.
It's it's an interest. The first album I think is pretty decent for what it was. It was kind of a, like I said, very kind of Pixies styled indie rock, kind of hints of Sonic Youth maybe in there, or that. So is that kind of style? So kind of a noise rock thing, but also it's Bowie, so he can't help at that point being somewhat melodic and Bowie-like. The second album's absolute crap. If you want to hear a crap album, go hear Tin Machine 2. This is a band that is, it's like Bowie wanted to do this as like it almost feels like, and I don't know if this is the case, that he wanted to do this as like a one album thing and let's see how it goes. Mm-hmm. And then somehow he got tricked or roped somehow contractually
like
into doing a second album.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that's the case, but certainly what it feels like. I mean, it's just phoning it in. And then they put out a live album called Oy Vey. Oh, so it's called Oy. Sorry, take that back. They put out a live album called Oy Vey, baby. Get it? Because Actune, baby.
Oh.
Oy Vey, baby.
Is that right?
Yes, that was
wow.
based off of that. And then the band broke up after that.
Wow, Bowie and puns. Wow.
That's a bad pun, by the way. It's a really bad pun. So, but even in interviews after the band broke up, he said, look, it was something I absolutely needed to do. I had no regrets about it. And it was some of the most fun I ever had kind of doing music. Because at that point he had said, look, I had thought about the fact of maybe I just retire and go work on my paintings and my art and basically go fuck off to the Bahamas or something for the rest of my life. And he just decided, no, I can't do that. So how do I kind of work past this sort of top 40 hole that I've dug myself? And that was kind of a way to explode everything so then he can go and do stuff like Earthling and Outside and kind of rebuild himself as the kind of that, like you said, electronic kind of industrial rock.
Do you think that there are trends that shape popular music that we would never imagine? Okay, I'm thinking about Dee Dee Ramone's rap album.
Oh, wait, I was at the Grammy Museum here in Los Angeles, and they have a Ramones exhibit.
Oh, they do. Okay,
and they have some of Dee Dee Ramone's Dee Dee King's stuff. Like they have the album and maybe like the jacket he wore on the cover.
So if you're like Bowie, you're always searching for the next trend in music. Like if these people didn't predict punk and punk happened and then punk changed music forever. And then they probably thought rap was going to do the same. Rap would change rock forever as punk changed rock. And I'm fascinated by how time makes fools of us all, especially musicians who try to capitalize on a new trend. So,
well, the Dee Dee King thing's interesting to me, by the way. If you guys don't know, Dee Dee Ramone was the original bass player of the Ramones, and in the 80s picked up a legitimate kind of love of New York, kind of late 80s rap, and decided to make a solo album as Dee Dee King.
If Blondie can make a rap song,
why can't the bass player from the Ramones?
Yeah.
And it's miserable. It's a terrible album. But I would beg to differ from this standpoint. I think he did that less as sort of this is my ticket to be successful, or I'm trying to hop on this trend. I think that was more of an actual like love for that type of music.
Okay.
Like I mean, obviously incredibly misguided and no talent for it. But I think it was based off of trying to, almost like the Chris Gaines thing where, I think Garth Brooks tried to do this.
Or Trent Reznor's Bluegrass album.
I remember that, yeah.
So it was legitimately his, and also it seemed like Dee Dee Ramone's point of view was very much in alignment with the lyrics of hip hop.
Right.
I'm the best, fuck everyone else.
Pretty much. It is interesting that Bowie he sidestepped the whole white guy doing rap thing.
Well,
God bless that. God bless him for that.
When we condemn artists for doing albums that are in hindsight seen as a bad fashion choice, I have to forget. We forget that these trends shift like the wind.
Yeah.
You never predict which way it's going. Michael, what's your fourth?
My last one, and I think this is David Bowie predicting exactly where it's going, which is his Black Star, his last album, his Death album. I think one of the, it's pretty recent, but I think one of the enduring images of Bowie will be this image of him as an older man. He died at 69, 70? With bandages wrapped around his eyes, with these weird black buttons kind of replacing his eyes, is a very iconic look. For a man that lived his life constantly changing his appearance and being part of pop culture, it's not surprising that he made his death a part of that too.
Yeah.
And, I don't think he's sold out his death. Like, I don't think I think he needed, in a sense, to make his death part of his life and part of his art as well. And I don't know if you've listened to it. I mean, it came out last year, and I've listened to it a few times. It hasn't really caught on to me. It's a pretty short album. It's 8-9 songs, but it's really haunting and weird for someone to come to grips with their own art and their own life and be okay with being like, I'm going to put out this last album. I know I'm dying. I have everything ready to go. It was like a perfect last performance piece from the music video, which he has a music video for a song Black Star where it's this weird shaking, people standing around and shaking and worshiping something, and this spacesuit that's basically been cast down, and you open it up and it's this bejeweled skull, and it's all of it harkens back to his alienness and his space oddityness, and it's Major Tom. And to be so cognizant of your own death and to still be able to put out this I think he's one of those weird true artists.
Yeah
for sure.
And
so it does seem the ultimate performance art when you can take the final act of your life, and if you're a control freak like Bowie, and if you're a person who wants all your art to be biographical, to take your final act and to choreograph it, to score it, to turn it into a piece of theater.
Well, and, for someone whose life was basically, at least kind of professional life was based on transitions.
Yeah, good point.
There's no, it's the final transition is death.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate one.
I think it's almost weirdly too soon to talk about it and how important, as a look or an identity it will be. But feel confident in a few years to look back and be like, oh, it's very significantly, very important as a last thing. It's funny you mentioned him as a control freak. Have you read stories about this album?
No,
he has they put out a vinyl copy of the album, and there's things that happen to it. If you open it up,
thanks hipsters.
That's right. if you take out the album from the sleeve and leave the sleeve in the sun, it can absorb sunlight and can shows stars and different things. And apparently there's more things that people haven't discovered just about the album cover. And it's amazing to think that someone has thought out your death to that point. You're not just writing, you're not just planning a tombstone. You're not just saying, oh, I want to be buried in a box, or I want to be cremated. It's I want my last album and the image of me is going to be immortalized in half a dozen different ways. And it's a little creepy and a little but I don't.
It's also embracing it, right?
I think so. I mean, I don't know.
You can't, you couldn't make that kind of statement if you weren't on some level ready to embrace death, or at least be comfortable with it. I
think he had liver cancer, and I think he probably knew about it for so long, and I think that's just one of those primers that's okay, well, I know this is coming, and I've got to finish this last thing.
Right.
It's weird and creepy and morbid, but so much of the rest of his life was kind of weird and creepy
and morbid. Yeah.
I do find it fascinating if you think of a guy who turned the most, maybe what was the most unusual thing about himself. If you think of how Bowie took his gayness, his weirdness, and
his pansexual
pansexual androgyny. There was other people who were doing the androgyny thing. and turned it into what made him most attractive and beautiful. There's so many people who found him to be the ideal masculine matinee idol as he was in women's clothing. So I do find that fascinating, to take the ultimate insult to a man who probably had as much vanity as Bowie did, and that is to see your body falling apart, to take the age and decrepitude that he was experiencing and turn it into something beautiful and artistic. Like that, that is an amazing statement, and something that shows how brave he was. Because I would be, if there was a recording, if somebody recorded me, instead of singing, I would just be going, "Fuck, I'm dying."
my final thoughts would be like, so they're putting out more Star Warses, and I'm not going to get to. Like, I don't know what's going to... Like, they're doing a number 10 now? Oh.
Yeah. They're doing one that's in between.
It's like, I'm so weirdly vain in that. Like, it's just like, oh, that's... This man's making... like, the pop culture album of his life, of his death, and it's like... But how did Han Solo really get the Millennium Falcon? And I'll never know!
I'll never know. Okay, so... each of these gentlemen have registered into the lockbox their favorite Bowie transformations and changes and changes. And before I get to decide who the top 4 that are being etched into the side of this granite edifice. So, but I got to say my favorite Bowie iteration was The Man Who Fell to Earth. And it really has to do with context, because that film isn't amazing. It's Bowie coked up beyond his mind, and it doesn't really fall into the category that I thought I was seeing when I was a kid and saw it in 1983 as sci-fi. Even though the film came out before Star Wars, before a lot of the sci-fi resurgence, it really is kind of a sci-fi film. But I saw it when I had fallen to earth from one school district, moved from one school district to a very suburban, elitist school district, and I was the poor, weird kid from the other side of the tracks. And I saw this film, and it really helped me understand how beautiful and fun and crazy and weird outsiders are. And I think that's the message that Bowie gave to the world, along with other people who were making a living out of being ugly. Like, think of like the B-52s, how they took thrift store chic and made it kind of fun. And obviously the punk movement, you took spitting and safety pins and leather and made it powerful. So this movie was very helpful to me to see that I could then go do cocaine and have sex.
I was going to say, alcohol. After watching this, young Jeffy Hopkins immediately had a 3-way with his female biology teacher and his male gym coach.
It was a crazy 15th birthday. I thought that was pretty impactful as a kid. So, all right. So these gentlemen have put into the hopper their choices, and I'm going to kind of improv my choices.
Jeff calls himself the Hopper, right? Jeff Hopkins calls himself
the Hopper.
Oh, this guy, thumbs pointing right at myself. Of course, we're all going to go with Ziggy Stardust. That was an incredible, indelible character that Bowie created, and like I said, if you can rock a mullet that well, then you deserve recognition for it. And then I think I'm going to go with Michael's Jareth, the Goblin King from Labyrinth, because that was definitely a persona that was perfectly matched with the role, probably rewritten for Bowie by Henson. And then I just love what Richard did in the compelling way he led us down the path of who the Thin White Duke was and who David Bowie was as a mime. So I think we're going 2 and 2, or maybe it's 3 and 1.
2.5. I think it's 2.5 and 1.5.
But I just had an amazing time dissecting this guy's career, because it just operates on so many levels and so many different media.
And we could have had another half hour on this. Easy.
Yeah. So this has been the Mount Rushmore podcast. I, as always, am performing in my current identity as Jeff.
And I'm Richard.
I'm the Goblin King.